The sun dipped low over the village of Nri, casting long golden streaks across the red earth. The people of the land moved with a quiet purpose, their days shaped by tradition, their fates woven tightly into the expectations of their ancestors. Nri was known for its prosperity, its overflowing granaries and bustling market square a testament to the gods' favor. The villagers believed in the wisdom of the elders, who guided their lives with the weight of generations past. To question them was to challenge the will of the gods themselves, and few dared to do so. Among them was Adana, a young woman whose beauty was rivaled only by the kindness in her heart. She carried herself with a quiet grace, her deep brown eyes reflecting the wisdom that set her apart from other girls her age. While many women in the village busied themselves with thoughts of marriage and children, Adana dreamed of something different. She longed for love, not just any love, but the kind that set souls ablaze, the kind that made one's heart race at the mere sight of another. She had grown up listening to the village griots tell stories of warriors who fought for love, of queens who defied fate to be with the ones they chose. But in her father's household, love was not something to be chosen. It was dictated. Her family was among the wealthiest in Nri, their compound a vast stretch of land dotted with mud brick houses and towering palm trees. Her father, Chief Omanuko, was a man of great influence, his voice carrying weight in the council of elders. He had spent his life upholding the traditions of their people, ensuring that every decision made in his household aligned with the village's customs. His wife, Adana's mother, was no different. A proud woman, she had raised her daughters with the firm belief that a woman's duty was to marry well and bring honor to her family. Adana, the eldest of her siblings, had always been the obedient one. She spoke only when necessary, performed her duties without complaint, and never gave her parents a reason to question her loyalty. But in the quiet corners of her heart, she harbored a silent rebellion. She dreamed of a life beyond the expectations placed upon her. She wanted to know what it felt like to choose, to look at a man and decide for herself if he was worthy of her love. But she knew her parents had other plans. Whispers of marriage had already begun swirling around her like the harmattan wind, carrying with them names of suitors she had never met, men whose wealth and status spoke louder than their hearts. It was only a matter of time before her fate was sealed, before she was handed over like a prize to a man chosen not by love, but by tradition. And when the announcement finally came, it was worse than she could have ever imagined. The news arrived like a sudden storm, sweeping through the village of Nri with an air of finality that left no room for protest. The elders had spoken. Adana was to be married. The announcement came on the morning of the new moon, when the village gathered in the central square for the reading of the week's decrees. The elders, seated on wooden stools beneath the shade of a great baobab tree, delivered their judgments with the authority of the gods themselves. It was here that disputes were settled, punishments declared, and fates sealed. On this particular morning, as the villagers stood in hushed anticipation, Chief Okonkwo, the eldest of the council, rose to speak. "The gods have chosen," he declared, his voice carrying over the silent crowd. "Adana, daughter of Chief Omanuko, will be given in marriage to Obinna, a man of noble destiny." A murmur rippled through the gathering. People turned to one another with puzzled expressions. Obinna? Who was this man? Adana's breath caught in her throat. The name was unfamiliar, a stranger's name. She felt her mother's grip tighten around her wrist, a silent warning not to react. Her father, seated among the council, remained stoic, his expression unreadable. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists in his lap. Then came the second revelation, the one that sent shockwaves through the crowd. "This man," Okonkwo continued, "is not whole. He bears affliction upon his body, but the gods have willed this union. It must be honored." A stunned silence followed. A crippled man? The women exchanged nervous glances, while the men shook their heads in disbelief. It was unheard of for a woman of Adana's standing to be given to a man with such a condition. In their world, strength and health were the marks of a worthy husband. A man who was weak in body was weak in spirit. Adana felt the air leave her lungs. Her knees trembled beneath her, and it took everything in her not to collapse. "No," she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice. But it didn't matter. Her fate had been decided without her. Her father stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. The will of the gods cannot be questioned. My daughter will do as she is commanded. The words were final. Later that night, in the privacy of their compound, Adana stormed into her father's chamber, her face flushed with fury. You agreed to this, she demanded. Without even asking me? Her mother sat quietly in the corner, her expression vacant, as if she had already accepted the inevitable. But her father met Adana's glare with steel in his eyes. You speak as if you have a choice, he said. You do not. I will not marry a man I do not know. You will, Adana. And you will do so with your head bowed in respect. Tears burned in her eyes. Because the elders said so? Because you fear the gods? Her father's face darkened. The gods see farther than we do. They do not make mistakes. Adana's heart pounded. What if they have? What if this is a test, and we are failing it by not questioning? Her father's hand came down on the wooden table with a thud, silencing her. You will not speak against the gods, he warned. Her mother finally looked up, her gaze filled with something like sorrow. Adana, my child, she said softly, we have no power to change this. Adana swallowed hard. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run. But she knew there was nowhere to go. The elders' decree was law, and no one, not even her father, would dare defy it. The village pitied her, but pity was not enough to save her. That night, she sat outside her hut, staring at the stars above, wondering if the gods had truly willed this, or if her fate had simply been stolen from her. The morning of the wedding arrived, but there was no joy in Adana's heart. The village was alive with the sound of drums and the scent of roasted meats, but to her, the celebration felt like a cruel mockery. The women bustled around her, adorning her in layers of coral beads and wrapping her in the finest ivory-colored fabric. They murmured about how beautiful she looked, but their eyes betrayed their pity. She sat still, staring at her reflection in the polished brass mirror before her. The girl who looked back at her was regal, stunning even, but behind her dark eyes was a storm of resentment and fear. Adana had imagined this day since she was a little girl, but never like this. Never with a man she did not love. Never with a man she did not even know. And certainly not with one the world had already deemed unworthy of her. Outside, the villagers gathered under the vast baobab tree where the ceremony would take place. The chatter was hushed, curiosity thick in the air. No one had seen the groom. No one knew where he had come from. Then, at last, he arrived. A hush fell over the crowd as a lone figure emerged from the dusty path leading to the village square. He moved with an agonizing slowness, each step punctuated by the dull thud of a wooden staff against the earth. His body was bent, his back hunched at an unnatural angle. A tattered brown cloak hung loosely over his frame, the hood casting a shadow over his face. The whispers began instantly. Is that really him? The elders have cursed her with this man. How can a woman like Adana be given to someone like this? Adana's throat tightened, but she kept her head high. She would not cry. She would not let them see her break. Her father stood at the front, his face unreadable. Her mother had already lowered her gaze, unwilling to meet her daughter's eyes. The elders sat solemnly, their expressions revealing nothing of the secrets they held. Obinna did not speak as he reached the ceremonial platform. He did not lift his head, did not offer a single word of greeting to his bride or the people who had gathered to witness their union. He simply stood there, hunched and silent, as though the weight of the world had settled onto his frail shoulders. Adana swallowed hard and stepped forward. She had made her decision, she would endure this. If this was her fate, she would face it with dignity. The priest chanted the sacred words, his voice rising above the murmurs. Offerings were placed before the gods, kola nuts cracked, libations poured onto the earth. And then, it was done. Adana and Obinna were now husband and wife. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the villagers dispersed, one truth remained unspoken, hanging heavy in the air like an unanswered prayer. No one, not even Adana, knew who Obinna truly was. The village feast had ended, and the laughter of the guests had faded into the night. Only the distant chirping of crickets and the rustling of the wind through the banana leaves remained. The glow of the torches outside flickered, casting eerie shadows against the walls of the bridal hut where Adana now stood, her heart pounding in her chest. She did not want to enter. Her entire life had been dictated for her, what to wear, how to speak, whom to marry. And now, she stood on the threshold of a life she had not chosen, about to share a room, a bed, with a man she did not know. Worse still, a man who had been presented to her as broken, frail, unworthy. She inhaled sharply and stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, meant to calm her nerves, but it only heightened her unease. A single oil lamp burned in the corner, casting a dim golden glow around the small room. At the far end, Obinna sat on a wooden stool, his figure hunched as it had been throughout the day. The tattered cloak still hung from his shoulders, his wooden staff resting beside him. He did not move. Adana clenched her fists, willing herself to be strong. If this was to be her fate, then so be it. She would endure, just as she had vowed. "I do not know who you are," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "But I will not live in fear." Still, he did not respond. The silence stretched between them, thick as the night air. And then, without warning, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the wooden staff. But instead of using it to support himself, he grasped it firmly with both hands, and snapped it in two. Adana gasped, her body going rigid. Before she could comprehend what was happening, Obinna rose to his full height. Gone was the hunched figure she had seen shuffling through the village. He stood tall, powerful, unbroken. Her breath caught in her throat as he lifted his hands to the edges of his hood, gripping the fabric tightly. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled it back. The face that was revealed beneath was not that of a crippled man. It was the face of a warrior. Strong, sharp features, deep-set eyes that burned with intensity, a jawline that spoke of both nobility and defiance. His skin was smooth, unmarred by the hardships his frail appearance had suggested. Adana's pulse thundered in her ears. She took a step back, her hands shaking at her sides. "Who?" The word barely escaped her lips. Obinna, or whoever he was, took a step forward, his gaze locked onto hers. "My name is not Obinna," he said, his voice rich and commanding, so different from the quiet, feeble man he had been hours ago. "I am Ikemba, heir to the throne of the hidden kingdom of Humiliated." Adana's mind spun. A prince? A deception? She should have been angry, should have demanded answers, but all she could do was stare at the man before her, the man who had been disguised as a cripple but now stood as if the world itself bowed at his feet. And in that moment, she realized that her life had just taken a turn far beyond anything she could have ever imagined. Adana's eyes remained fixed on Ikemba, her mind swirling with confusion, anger, and a reluctant curiosity that she could neither ignore nor fully understand. The revelations he shared, although startling, stirred a maelstrom of emotions deep within her. The prince explained his tale with a measured tone, each word weighted by the gravity of his past. He spoke of a time when he was not a man of stature but a young heir with dreams of valor and leadership, a time when his every stride echoed with the promise of a glorious future. Yet, that promise was shattered when an envious rival, a man blinded by jealousy and ambition, cast a dark curse upon him. The curse, Ikemba revealed, was designed to strip him of his honor and strength, to force him into a pitiable state where his potential would be forever overshadowed by frailty. He recalled waking one fateful morning to discover that his once strong body had turned weak and unsteady. The curse twisted his limbs, leaving him bent and unable to carry the weight of his royal destiny. In the mirror, the reflection was unrecognizable, a man who could barely stand upright, shunned by those who valued strength above all. For weeks, Ikemba endured the torment of this transformation. His days were filled with silent suffering, while nights brought an unbearable loneliness. The world, once filled with the laughter of his companions and the warm embrace of his family, now seemed cold and unyielding. In despair, his parents had sought every remedy known to healers and priests, desperate to restore their son's former self. Yet, the curse was powerful, its roots deeply entangled with ancient magic that defied moral understanding. It was only when an elder seer, whose eyes had witnessed the ebb and flow of many such tragedies, spoke of fate that a glimmer of hope emerged. The seer declared that the curse could be broken only by an act of true acceptance, a union formed not out of obligation or duty, but through the genuine acceptance of a man's true self, beyond the physical afflictions that marred him. Ikemba's voice softened as he recounted the heavy decision that followed. His parents, resolute and desperate, chose to send him away, cloaking him in a disguise that would mask the obvious signs of his affliction. They believed that if he could find a woman who looked beyond his apparent weakness, who saw the strength of his spirit rather than the frailty of his body, then perhaps the curse might lose its grip. In that moment of desperation, his royal title was cast aside. No longer was he to be known as the prince, he became merely a man in search of redemption, a man forced to walk the earth incognito. As Ikemba spoke, Adana's heart pounded with an intensity that left her breathless. Every detail of his story seemed to echo her own secret longings, her desire for a life chosen by her heart, rather than dictated by the relentless decrees of fate. Yet, the shock of his confession mingled with her lingering doubts. Could she trust this man who had deceived her, even if his deception was born of a curse beyond his control? She searched his eyes for a sign, any hint that the pain and hope in his story were genuine. In them, she saw a glimmer of vulnerability, a silent plea for understanding that resonated with her own hidden defiance against the life forced upon her. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, she felt betrayed by the intricate web of lies that had led her to this moment, a marriage arranged by elders and sealed by a curse. On the other hand, the raw honesty in Ikemba's voice stirred something within her, a realization that perhaps the path before her was not as rigid as she had once believed. His plight, so cruelly intertwined with destiny, was a reminder that life's trials often came disguised in forms unexpected, forcing hearts to confront their deepest fears and desires. "Do you truly believe," she asked in a trembling voice, "that my acceptance of you can break such a curse?" Her words hung in the air like a fragile hope, fragile yet desperate. Ikemba's expression grew solemn as he responded, "I do, Adana. The curse was never meant to punish me alone, it was meant to test the hearts of those who might walk beside me. My rival's envy was so deep that he sought to strip me not only of my power but of my chance at genuine love. My parents believed that only a woman who could see past the physical, who could embrace me with all my scars and weaknesses, would have the strength to break the spell." For a long moment, silence enveloped the small hut as the weight of his words settled over them. Adana's emotions swirled like the dust outside, caught between the remnants of her earlier indignation and a burgeoning, uncertain compassion. The idea that love could be the key to freeing him from his torment was both alluring and terrifying. Was it possible that her own heart, so long constrained by duty and tradition, could be the instrument of such a transformation? Her thoughts wandered to the countless nights she had spent beneath the starlit sky, yearning for a love that was real and transformative, a love that could break the chains of a destiny imposed by others. Now, faced with this enigmatic prince, that distant dream felt suddenly within reach, yet shrouded in uncertainty. The magic of fate had intertwined their lives in a manner so unexpected that every instinct screamed caution, even as her heart leaned towards the possibility of a deeper connection. In the quiet intimacy of that moment, the true cost of the deception became apparent. The sacrifice Ikemba had made, to conceal his identity, to endure public humiliation and pity, spoke of a love so profound that it defied the harsh judgments of society. And though Adana felt the sting of betrayal, she could not ignore the sincerity in his eyes or the undeniable strength that shone through his words. Her inner turmoil was palpable, a silent struggle between the remnants of her own pride and the tentative hope that perhaps, just perhaps, their fates were not entirely written in stone. I need time," she finally whispered, her voice laced with both determination and uncertainty. "Time to understand if I can trust the man behind this disguise, and if I can embrace the possibility of a love that goes beyond what I ever imagined." Ikemba's gaze softened as he stepped closer, his presence enveloping her in a warmth that belied his recent trials. "I will wait for you, Adana," he promised softly. "Until the day you see me for who I truly am, and until the curse is nothing but a distant memory. As the night deepened and the shadows danced across the walls of the modest hut, the two sat in a silence filled with unspoken questions and tentative hopes. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with the echoes of old wounds and the challenges of a destiny rewritten. But in that fragile, fleeting moment, the possibility of redemption, and perhaps a love that could conquer even the darkest of curses, glimmered like a beacon in the night. Adana stood at the threshold of her home, her heart pounding as she watched the village erupt into chaos. The revelation of Ikemba's true identity had spread like wildfire, carried from hut to hut, market stall to market stall, until the entire village buzzed with speculation, disbelief, and raw emotion. Some of the villagers rejoiced. The idea that their daughter, whom they had pitied just days before, was now married to a prince filled them with pride. The elders, who had arranged the marriage, saw it as a sign that the gods had truly blessed their decision. Women whispered to one another, shaking their heads in awe at Adana's unexpected fortune. But not everyone was pleased. She should have accepted him from the start, one elder scoffed. She cried and resisted, and now she acts as if she has been wronged? She is ungrateful, another voice chimed in. Many would have taken him even as a cripple. Now that he stands tall, she hesitates. Does she think she deserves better? Adana clenched her fists, anger rising in her chest. She had never asked for this. She had never wanted to be forced into a marriage, and she certainly had not wished to be part of some elaborate test. Was it so wrong to want love to come honestly, without disguise or deception? Ikemba, standing beside her, exhaled deeply. His once hidden presence now carried the weight of royalty, and the way the villagers regarded him had changed in an instant. Gone was the pity in their eyes, replaced now by admiration, reverence, and in some, envy. He watched Adana carefully, as if sensing the storm inside her. I know this was not fair to you, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. But I swear to you, I will prove myself, not as a prince, but as a man worthy of your heart. Adana turned to him, searching his face. And how do you expect to do that? She asked, her voice sharp. You have already shown me two versions of yourself. Which one am I supposed to believe? Ikemba did not flinch. The one I show you now, from this moment forward. Before she could respond, a commotion at the village entrance drew their attention. A procession of men on horseback rode into the village, their tunics adorned with golden embroidery. At their center were two regal figures, a man and a woman whose very presence commanded respect. The king and queen of Humiliated. Ikemba's parents. Gasps rippled through the villagers as they stepped forward, their expressions a mix of relief and urgency. The queen's eyes shone with unshed tears as she rushed to her son, placing her hands upon his face as if she still could not believe that the curse had been lifted. My son, she whispered, her voice breaking. The gods have answered our prayers. The king, a towering man with a presence as firm as iron, rested a hand on Ikemba's shoulder. Though his face remained composed, there was a flicker of emotion beneath his stern exterior. It is time to come home, he said. Ikemba nodded. Yes, father. The queen's gaze shifted to Adana, warmth filling her eyes. And you, she said, taking Adana's hands in her own. You are the reason he stands before us, whole again. You have saved our son, our kingdom. Adana's stomach twisted. She was no savior. She had spent more time resenting her marriage than embracing it. This was not some fairy tale where she had fallen in love with a cursed prince and broken his spell through devotion. She had been deceived, and she had yet to make peace with it. The king's voice rang with authority. You will come with us. We will hold a great celebration in your honor, and you shall take your rightful place as the future queen of Humiliated. The villagers erupted into cheers. To have their daughter become a queen, it was beyond their wildest dreams. Mothers clutched their daughters, whispering that this was the kind of fortune one could only pray for. The elders beamed, already imagining the prestige this union would bring to their village. But Adana felt nothing but unease. Her place? How could she claim a place she did not yet understand? How could she walk into a palace, a kingdom she had never seen, and pretend to belong? She turned to Ikemba, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "I will not go," she said. A hush fell over the crowd. The queen blinked in shock. "My dear, surely you do not mean—" "I mean every word," Adana interrupted, her voice steady. "I will not leave my home, my family, just because it is expected of me. I married a stranger who deceived me. And now, you ask me to uproot my life for him? No." She shook her head, lifting her chin defiantly. "If I go with you, it will be because I choose to, not because it is demanded of me." The whispers among the villagers grew louder. Some murmured in agreement, others in disbelief. Who was she to defy royalty? Ikemba stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Then tell me, Adana, what do you need?" She stared at him, at the man who had once seemed like a cruel joke played by fate, now standing before her as a prince who had humbled himself in search of love. "I need time," she said. "Time to understand who you are beyond the disguises, beyond the curse and the titles. I need to know if the man behind all of this is someone I can trust, someone I can love." The queen looked pained, but she nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. The king, though clearly displeased, did not object. He was not a man who forced matters of the heart. Ikemba's expression did not waver. If anything, it softened. "Then take all the time you need," he said. "I will wait." The promise hung between them, carrying with it an uncertainty that neither could predict. As the night settled over the village, Adana knew one thing for certain: her fate was no longer in the hands of elders, or traditions, or even the gods. It was hers to decide. Weeks passed, and though Adana had insisted on time, she found herself unable to ignore the pull of curiosity. The more she observed Ikemba, the more she questioned her own rigid perception of love and fate. He was patient, never pressing her to make a decision, yet his quiet devotion was evident in the way he remained near, offering his presence without demand. When the invitation came at last, a formal request from the king and queen for Adana to visit Humiliated, she knew her time of hesitation was over. Her parents urged her to go, though their motivations were obvious. The prospect of their daughter becoming queen was too great an honor to ignore. The villagers, too, buzzed with anticipation, eager to see how she would fare in a land of splendor and power. And so, with measured steps and a heart still tangled with uncertainty, Adana embarked on the journey to Ikemba's kingdom. The moment she entered Humiliated, she understood that her trials had only just begun. The city was grand beyond imagination, with towering palace walls that gleamed under the sun and streets filled with people who had heard of the woman who had saved their prince. Some greeted her with warmth, while others observed her with guarded curiosity. She was an outsider, a village girl suddenly thrust into the world of royalty. Among those who watched her most closely was Princess Ikemba. Ikemba had once been Ikemba's intended bride, chosen by their families long before the curse had changed his fate. She was a woman of striking beauty and sharp intelligence, beloved by the court for her grace and cunning. But beneath her regal exterior was a heart hardened by resentment. She had mourned when Ikemba was cursed, believing that their future had been stolen by fate. And yet, the moment he was restored, he had returned not for her, but for some village girl, a girl who had resisted him, rejected him, and now stood on the brink of taking the throne that should have been hers. It was unacceptable. Ikemba would not stand by and allow Adana to claim what she did not deserve. Thus, when the court elders gathered to discuss Adana's place within the kingdom, Ikemba spoke first, her voice as smooth as silk. "It is only right that she prove herself," she said, smiling though her eyes remained cold. "A future queen must show that she is worthy. Do we not owe it to our people to ensure that the woman beside our prince is strong, wise, and loyal?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. It was not an unreasonable request. Many queens before Adana had faced trials to prove their worth. If she truly belonged in Humiliated, she would have to earn her place. Ikemba's jaw tightened, but he did not object. He turned to Adana, his expression unreadable. "This is not my will," he said quietly. "You do not have to do this." But Adana straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with quiet defiance. She had spent her life being told whom she would marry, where she would belong. For once, she wanted to make the choice herself. "I will take the trials," she said. A flicker of satisfaction passed over Ifeoma's face. So it begins. The trials. The first trial tested intelligence. Adana was led to the great hall, where the elders presented her with a riddle known only to those of royal blood. It was a test of wit, meant to prove her ability to make decisions with wisdom rather than impulse. A golden vessel was placed before her, filled with water. Beside it, 2 smaller jugs, one capable of holding 3 measures of water, the other 5. Without spilling a drop, an elder decreed, "Measure exactly 4 measures of water into this vessel." The courtiers whispered among themselves. It was a puzzle many had failed before. But Adana studied the problem, recalling the village games she had played as a child, where measuring water had been an unspoken skill. Carefully, she filled the 5-measure jug to the top, then poured it into the 3-measure jug, leaving exactly 2 measures behind. She emptied the smaller jug, then transferred the remaining 2 measures into it. Filling the 5-measure jug again, she carefully poured until the 3-measure jug was full, leaving exactly 4 measures in the larger jug. The hall fell silent. Then, murmurs of approval spread. The elders nodded in satisfaction. She had passed the first test. The second trial tested strength. Not the strength of battle, but endurance, perseverance, the ability to withstand hardship without surrender. At dawn, she was taken to the riverbanks, where a heavy basket of stones awaited her. "You must carry this up the mountain," an elder instructed, "without setting it down." The path was treacherous, the sun relentless. Each step sent fire through her muscles, but Adana gritted her teeth and moved forward. She thought of the women in her village, carrying water for miles without complaint. She thought of her mother, who had endured a marriage of duty but never let hardship steal her spirit. Her legs trembled, her breath came in gasps, but she did not falter. At last, as dusk settled over the land, she reached the mountaintop, sweat-drenched and shaking, but victorious. The elders, though stoic, could not hide their approval. She had passed the second test. The final trial tested loyalty. For this, she was taken to the palace gardens, where a servant stood bound, accused of stealing royal jewels. "You are given one choice," Ifeoma announced smoothly. "You may prove your loyalty to the kingdom by delivering the punishment yourself, or you may speak on his behalf, should you believe his innocence. But if you choose to defend him and are proven wrong, you shall be punished in his place." A hush fell over the crowd. It was a trap. Ifeoma had arranged for the servant to confess if threatened, making Adana's defense a dangerous gamble. Adana met the servant's eyes. He was shaking, terrified. She turned to Ifeoma, her voice steady. "And what if I ask for proof before making a judgment?" Ifeoma's smile faltered. "Proof?" "Yes," Adana said. "A queen does not act on assumption. She seeks the truth." The elders exchanged glances, nodding in approval. It was a fair request. Servants were called to testify. And slowly, through careful questioning, the truth emerged: the jewels had not been stolen at all, merely misplaced. Adana had chosen wisely. She had passed the third test. The court erupted into applause. Even Ifeoma, for all her scheming, could do nothing but watch as Adana stood victorious. Ikemba stepped forward, pride shining in his gaze. "You have proven yourself beyond measure," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But there is still one question left to answer, Adana." He took her hands in his. "Will you stay? Not as a queen by decree, but as my wife, my partner, by your own choice?" Silence fell. And then, with a slow, deliberate nod, Adana finally spoke the words she had been too afraid to say before. "Yes." Cheers erupted. The kingdom of Humiliated had found its queen. And in that moment, Adana knew, this time, she had chosen her own fate. The cheers of the court still echoed in Adana's ears as she stood beside Ikemba, the weight of her victory settling over her. The trials had been grueling, each one testing not only her strength and wisdom but also her very identity. She had entered Humiliated as an outsider, a village girl forced into an unwanted marriage. But now, standing before the gathered nobles, she was no longer merely a bride chosen by fate, she was a woman who had carved her own destiny. Yet, even as the kingdom celebrated her triumph, one figure stood apart from the revelry. Princess Ikemba. The once adored noblewoman, who had wielded influence with effortless grace, now stood exposed. The very people who had once whispered of her grandeur now murmured of her deceit. Her attempt to undermine Adana had failed, and worse still, it had revealed the true depths of her bitterness. The king's voice cut through the jubilant air, heavy with disappointment. Ikemba, you have brought shame to this court. You sought to humiliate and sabotage a woman who proved herself worthy, not just of the throne, but of respect. His gaze was sharp, unyielding. For your actions, you are to be stripped of your title and exiled from Humiliated. A gasp rippled through the court. Ikemba's face twisted in a mixture of fury and despair. You cannot do this, she hissed, but the authority in the king's voice had already sealed her fate. 2 guards stepped forward. She turned to Ikemba, her voice desperate. You were supposed to be mine. Ikemba's expression remained unmoved. You were never meant to possess me, he said calmly. Love is not a prize to be won, Ikemba. It is given freely, or not at all. With that, Ikemba was led away, her once proud steps faltering as the realization of her downfall sank in. The moment she disappeared from sight, Ikemba turned back to Adana. And for the first time since their journey began, there was nothing between them, no disguises, no duty, no uncertainty. Only truth. In the days that followed, Adana and Ikemba grew closer, no longer bound by expectations but by a deepening understanding. She saw the man behind the prince, the man who had risked everything to find a wife who would love him for more than his title. And Ikemba, in turn, saw in Adana not just the woman who had been tested by trials but a woman of courage, wisdom, and a heart strong enough to rewrite fate itself. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the lanterns flicker in the night sky, Ikemba reached for her hand. You once asked me which version of myself you should believe, he murmured. She turned to him, the warm glow of the lanterns reflecting in her eyes. Yes. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her skin. Believe this, he said. Believe what we have built together. Believe that I choose you, not because of trials, not because of duty, but because I love you. Adana's heart swelled. For so long, she had resisted, fearing that she had no control over her own fate. But standing here, with the man who had once been a stranger, she realized something profound. Fate was not something to be feared. It was something to be shaped, molded by courage and choice. And for the first time, she made her choice freely. I love you too, she whispered. The words were a promise, a vow stronger than any decree made by elders or kings. And with that, the decision was made, they would return to her village, not as a prince forced into disguise or a girl given away without consent, but as husband and wife, as equals who had chosen each other. When they arrived, the village erupted into joyous disbelief. The girl they had pitied, the one they had mourned as lost to fate, returned not as a reluctant bride but as a queen, radiant, confident, and deeply in love. Adana's parents wept, both from pride and regret. Her father, who had once insisted that obedience was the only path, now saw that courage could carve its own way. The elders, who had dictated her future without her consent, stood in silence as she spoke before the village, her voice unwavering. We have followed traditions without question for too long, she declared. We have allowed fate to be decided for us rather than by us. But today, let us celebrate not just a marriage, but a new way of thinking, a way that honors both love and duty, choice and tradition. A thunderous cheer erupted from the crowd. The night of their return became a night of celebration unlike any the village had seen before. Fires were lit, drums pounded in joyous rhythm, and laughter rang through the air. People danced beneath the stars, their movements a reflection of newfound hope. As the festivities continued, Ikemba pulled Adana close, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. She smiled, resting her head against his chest. "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her forehead, whispering, "Then that is all that matters." And so, under the vast African sky, with the echoes of music and laughter surrounding them, they danced, two souls who had defied fate, who had turned an unwanted marriage into a love story written by their own hands. A love story that would be told for generations to come.